They laughed while she stood there in silence, phones raised, champagne spilling, humiliation fully choreographed. What they didn't know, what no one in that ballroom knew, was that the billion-dollar deal was already dying in her hands. The question is, why didn't she stop them? The evening sky over Greenwich, Connecticut hung heavy and golden, the kind of sunset that looked expensive even from a distance. A midnight blue sedan glided through wrought iron gates that opened without a sound, past hedges sculpted into geometry and fountain sculptures that probably cost more than most homes. This wasn't just wealth. This was legacy, the kind that came with crests, not contracts. Before we begin, watch closely. This story isn't about money. It's about power, silence, and the exact moment respect stops being negotiable. If you've ever been underestimated, stay with me. This story is for you. She'd been underestimated before. Counted out. Dismissed as ambitious, when men would have been called visionary. But she'd learned early that the loudest people in the room were rarely the most powerful. Her grandmother had taught her that. Baby, you don't need to announce yourself. Let your work do it for you. And her work had. Apex Strategic Holdings had become one of the most respected risk management firms in the country. Quietly, deliberately, without begging for a seat at anyone's table. But the Ellison deal was different. It wasn't just a partnership. It was a gateway. A billion-dollar handshake that would open doors even her reputation couldn't unlock. Or so she'd thought. Now, standing in this gilded cage disguised as a guest suite, Theresa felt something she hadn't felt in years. Doubt. Not in herself. In them. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like something was off, even though everything looked perfect? Comment if you felt it too. Dinner was announced at 7 sharp. Theresa descended the staircase to find the ballroom transformed, candlelight bouncing off crystal, champagne circulating on silver trays, guests clustered in tight circles of polished laughter. The kind of laughter that sounded rehearsed. And at the center of it all stood the Ellisons. Sonia moved through the room like she owned the oxygen itself. Loud, magnetic, draped in emerald green that caught every light. She touched arms, interrupted conversations, and everyone leaned in when she spoke. Her humor landed sharp, always at someone else's expense, always followed by laughter that felt more like permission than joy. Keith stood near the bar, quieter, but no less commanding. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone shifted the room's gravity. Advisors hovered near him, waiting for eye contact. When he nodded, deals moved forward. When he didn't, they died in silence. And then there was Nicholas. The youngest Ellison, late 20s, leaning against a marble column with his phone angled just so. Always recording. Always watching. He smiled at nothing in particular, as if the whole evening were content he was curating. A server, older, black, meticulous, passed by with a tray. Sonia didn't look at her, just plucked a glass mid-stride and kept talking. The woman's face stayed neutral, trained into invisibility. Theresa noticed. Sonia's gaze found her across the room. Theresa, there you are. She crossed the floor, champagne in hand, smile bright and sharp. You look so serious. Are you always this intense, or is it just for us? A few guests nearby chuckled. Theresa met her eyes, expression unchanged. I take my work seriously. I assumed that's why I was invited. Sonia's smile tightened. Of course. We love that about you. She sipped her drink. Though you should relax a little. We're all friends here. Keith appeared beside them. Said nothing. Just observed. And across the room, Nicholas raised his phone, smiling, recording. Theresa's jaw tightened. This wasn't networking. This was positioning. And she was the target. Be honest, was Sonia joking or testing Theresa? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to see how you read that moment. Keith gestured toward a private sitting room off the main ballroom. Shall we discuss the particulars? Theresa followed, Sonia trailing behind with her champagne glass like a prop she refused to put down. The room was smaller. Quieter. Leather chairs, dark wood, a contract laid out on the table like a centerpiece. Keith sat, motioning for Theresa to do the same. This partnership, Keith began, his voice measured, positions Apex as a premier subsidiary under the Ellison Holdings umbrella. Global reach. Immediate capital injection. $1 billion, Theresa. That's generosity. Theresa scanned the terms in front of her. Majority board control, Ellison Holdings. Brand integration. Apex Strategic becomes Apex, an Ellison company. Final decision authority, retained by primary stakeholder. Her pulse didn't quicken. Her face didn't change. But her mind was cataloging every clause, every buried assumption. This wasn't a partnership. It was absorption. Generous, Theresa said evenly, flipping a page. Though these control clauses seem strategic, Keith interrupted smoothly. We protect our investments. I'm sure you understand. Sonia leaned over Theresa's shoulder, laughing. God, you really do read everything, don't you? Keith, she's going to take all night. A few guests had wandered closer to the doorway, watching. Theresa didn't look up. I read what I sign. Of course you do, Sonia said, louder now, playing to the room. So thorough. So careful. It's adorable. Keith said nothing. Just watched. Theresa turned another page, her jaw tight. The room felt smaller. The laughter outside felt closer. She set the contract down slowly, her hands flat on the table. The terms were clear now. They weren't offering her a seat at the table. They were offering her a leash. Gilded, expensive, irreversible. This wasn't partnership. This was ownership disguised as opportunity. And they assumed she'd be grateful enough to accept it. If someone offered you $1 billion with hidden strings attached, would you still take it? They returned to the ballroom, and the air had changed. Guests were watching now, not subtly but openly. Curious. Entertained. Sonia raised her voice, projecting across the room. Theresa was just in there dissecting every line of the contract. I mean, we get it, you're smart. But relax, darling. You don't have to be so intense all the time. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not polite chuckles. Real laughter. The kind that lands on someone. Theresa stood perfectly still, her champagne glass untouched in her hand. Sonia turned to the nearest cluster of guests. I told Keith we should have sent a summary. Save her the stress. But no, she wanted the full experience. Someone whispered, just loud enough. Is she always like this? Nicholas moved closer, phone raised now, not even pretending. He was recording openly, grinning like this was dinner theater he'd paid for. Keith stood near the bar, watching. Arms crossed. Expression unreadable. He could have stopped it. He didn't. Theresa's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down. India, everything okay? You've been quiet. Her thumb hovered over the screen. The room felt like it was closing in. Cryliers glittering overhead. Faces turned toward her, waiting. Waiting for what? An outburst? Tears? Submission? She looked up. Sonia was still talking, gesturing with her champagne. Nicholas was still filming. Keith was still silent. And in that moment, Theresa understood. This wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated. They were testing her, pushing her, seeing how much disrespect she would tolerate in exchange for access. Theresa's grip tightened around her phone, but her face remained calm, controlled. And deep beneath the surface, something shifted. Not panic, not anger, but power, gathering quietly, deliberately, like a storm deciding when to break. She typed one word back to India. Then she lifted her phone to her ear and made a call. This is where it gets uncomfortable. At this point, would you have spoken up or stayed silent like Theresa? Tell us in the comments. Sonia didn't stop. She pointed directly at Theresa, her voice carrying across the ballroom like a spotlight. Look at her, on the phone during dinner. Unbelievable. The guests turned in unison, a theater audience watching the stage. Nicholas zoomed in, grinning wider. Someone near the back whispered, not quietly enough. Is she going to cry? Another voice. She looks so uncomfortable. Laughter bubbled up again, nervous and cruel. Theresa stood in the center of it all, phone pressed to her ear, expression unchanging. Her CFO's voice came through, sharp with concern. Theresa, what's happening? Talk to me. Theresa didn't answer. She just listened. Let the moment breathe. Sonia stepped closer, emboldened. Seriously, Theresa. We're trying to celebrate you. The least you could do is participate. Keith remained by the bar. Still watching. Still silent. And that silence. His silence was the confirmation. He wasn't going to stop this. Because this was the point. Theresa's gaze swept the room slowly. The pointed fingers. The phones recording. The whispers. The laughter that wasn't laughter at all. It was performance. Cruelty dressed up as humor. They weren't celebrating her. They were hazing her. Testing whether she'd swallow humiliation in exchange for their billion-dollar leash. Whether she'd smile through disrespect because the money was too good to walk away from. Whether she valued access more than dignity. Theresa's jaw tightened. Crystal clarity settled over her like cold water. This wasn't about the deal. It was about dominance. And they'd made a fatal miscalculation. They thought she needed them. But she didn't. Theresa lowered the phone slightly, her eyes locking onto Sonia's. And for the first time all night, she smiled. Not warmly. Not politely. But with the quiet certainty of someone who'd just decided how this story would end. Time slowed. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the whispers, all of it faded into background noise. Theresa stood in the center of the ballroom, phone in hand, and felt the weight of the moment settle around her like gravity. They think money equals dominance. She could see it in Sonia's smirk, in Keith's calculated silence, in Nicholas's phone still recording her humiliation for posterity. They think $1 billion buys compliance. But they'd made one critical error. They assumed she was here because she had no other choice. They were wrong. Theresa brought the phone back to her ear. "India," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the noise. "I need you to do something for me." Her CFO's response was immediate. "Anything." Theresa's gaze swept across the room one last time. Sonia still performing, Keith still watching, Nicholas still filming, and she made her decision. Not emotionally. Not impulsively. Strategically. She ended the call. Then, with the same composure she'd carried all evening, she opened her messages and typed. "Terminate negotiations. Effective immediately. Notify legal and send formal withdrawal to all parties within the hour." She hit send. No announcement. No confrontation. No explanation. Just a quiet shift in power that no one else in the room could see yet. But it was done. The billion-dollar deal they thought they controlled, the partnership they'd designed to own her, had just evaporated. And standing beneath their crystal chandeliers, surrounded by their laughter and champagne, Theresa Mundy felt something she hadn't felt all night. Free. The room continued around her, oblivious. But deep beneath the surface, a detonation had occurred. It was silent, irreversible, and devastating. Was Theresa's action a real power move or reckless gamble? Let's find out. It started with a single buzz, then another, then a cascade. Phones lit up across the ballroom, advisors, board members, legal counsel. Hands reached into pockets and purses. Faces changed from amused to confused. An older man in a navy suit stepped away from his conversation, phone pressed to his ear, his expression darkening. "What do you mean terminated?" Another advisor rushed toward Keith, whispering urgently. Keith's face, calm all evening, finally shifted. His jaw tightened. His eyes found Theresa across the room. Sonia's smile faltered. "What's going on?" Nicholas lowered his phone slightly, still recording, but his grin had disappeared. He looked around, sensing the shift but not understanding it. More phones. More whispers. Apex just pulled out. The deal's dead. She canceled. Theresa set her champagne glass down on the nearest table, untouched, and turned toward the exit. Sonia stepped into her path, her voice sharp now, stripped of its earlier theatrics. "Theresa, what is this?" Theresa met her eyes. Said nothing. Keith moved forward, his voice low and controlled. "We should talk. Privately." "There's nothing to discuss," Theresa said calmly. The terms weren't acceptable. "Is everything okay?" Someone called from the crowd, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Theresa paused at the threshold, glancing back at the room one final time. Faces frozen in confusion. And the Ellison family, silent now, stripped of their choreography. She looked directly at Keith. "It will be," she said. Then she walked out. Behind her, the ballroom erupted into chaos, advisors scrambling, phones ringing, voices rising. But Theresa didn't look back. The deal was officially canceled, and she had done it without raising her voice once. By morning, the Ellison estate was in crisis mode. Advisors filled the sitting room where the contract had been laid out just hours before. Voices overlapped, tense and urgent. Keith stood at the head of the table, jaw clenched, while Sonia paced near the window, her champagne confidence replaced with something sharper. Panic. "How did this happen?" one board member demanded. "We had her cornered." "She wasn't cornered," Keith said quietly. "We were." The calls came in waves. Partners demanding explanations. Investors questioning judgment. A financial outlet had already picked up the story. Ellison Holdings loses billion-dollar deal after private event gone wrong. And then Nicholas's video surfaced. Someone, maybe a guest, maybe Nicholas himself trying to salvage his image, leaked it online. The footage showed everything. Sonia pointing and mocking, guests laughing, Theresa standing calm and composed while being publicly humiliated. The internet responded swiftly. "This is how billionaires treat black women executives?" Theresa Mundy walked away with her dignity. The Ellisons lost $1 billion and their reputation. Within 48 hours, industry leaders began weighing in. A venture capital firm publicly praised Theresa's composure and offered partnership discussions. A tech CEO tweeted, "Dignity over dollars. Every time. Respect to Theresa Mundy." 3 major financial outlets published op-eds on power dynamics in elite business spaces, with Theresa's name headlining each one. Meanwhile, the Ellison family scrambled to contain the damage. Press releases. Apologies that rang hollow. Statements about misunderstandings. None of it worked. Sonia sat in the now-empty ballroom, staring at her phone, scrolling through comment after comment, dismantling everything she thought she controlled. Keith stood in the doorway, silent. And for the first time, they both understood. They hadn't humiliated Theresa Mundy. They'd exposed themselves. And they'd done it to the one woman who didn't need their money or their approval. They'd misjudged the wrong woman. Do you think public backlash is karma or consequence? One word only. I'm reading every answer. 3 weeks later, Theresa sat in a sunlit conference room in Chicago, pen in hand. Across from her sat the leadership team of Meridian Global, a consortium that had watched the Ellison debacle unfold and reached out within days. No games, no tests, no performance, just respect. The contract in front of her was different. Equal board representation, shared branding, mutual decision-making authority. A partnership that didn't require her to shrink, comply, or tolerate disrespect in exchange for opportunity. She signed her name with the same steady hand that had typed the termination message in that ballroom. "Welcome aboard," the CEO said, extending his hand. "We're honored to work with you." Theresa shook it. Likewise. By the time she returned to Atlanta, the media narrative had fully shifted. Theresa Mundy didn't need the Ellison deal, they needed her. Composure over capital. How one CEO redefined power. The woman who walked away and won. Interviews followed. Speaking invitations. Universities asking her to address their business students. But Theresa kept her message simple. Humiliation only works if you accept it. Respect isn't negotiable. Not for $1 billion. Not for access. Not for anyone. She sat in her office that evening, looking out over the Atlanta skyline, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. "Baby, you don't need to announce yourself. Let your work do it for you." And it had. Not by begging for a seat at their table, but by building her own and choosing who deserved to sit at it. The Ellisons had tried to buy her dignity. Instead, they'd lost everything that mattered. Theresa leaned back in her chair, a quiet smile crossing her face. They'd tried to shame her in public. She'd canceled them in silence and let the world do the rest. Power, she'd learned long ago, never needed an apology. It just needed to know its worth. What's the real lesson here? Money, respect, or leverage? Comment the one word that hit you hardest. If this story changed how you see power, respect, or walking away, like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because the next story proves this wasn't the only time silence won.